Okay, good evening everyone. And guess what I didn't do? I didn't fix my captions. Again, as always. Always, 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 always. It should be just like second nature by now to fix them. For some reason, it is not. Don't ask me why. It is just too much to ask. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and change them on the game play page because I'll be needing them later. So bear with me. And then we'll get back to the chat screen. There we go. All right. So, we are starting a new book tonight. Well, new novella, anyway, which is Lost Tribe of the Sith Savior. It's the next one, number 4. Another short one, of course. They're all short. So, okay. So let's just get to it, shall we? Savior. Here we go. Okay, so we've moved ahead again in time just a tiny bit. So it's 4,975 years before the Battle of Yavin. Children of Kesh, your protectors have come home to you again. Corson waited for the clamor of from the crowd to die down. It didn't. Commander Yaru Corson, Grand Lord of the tribe of Sith on Kesh, stood atop the marbled platform and looked across the churning sea of ecstatic purple faces. Behind him rose the columns and domes of his new home. Once a native village, Tav was now a Sith capital. The buildings had been raised quickly on the site of the old Circle Eternal for this day, exactly a quarter century in standard years after the Sith arrival on Kesh. Corson had been determined to make that anniversary one to celebrate, rather than lament. With today's dedication, Corson signaled his people's intent to live among the Kashiri for good. Now, years after the crash, it was clear that nothing more could be done to repair Omen. There was no reason to live in their lofty temple in the crash site when such beauty existed below. Corson cast his gaze upward, toward the cloudy peak on the western horizon. A skeleton team of Sith and Kashiri workers was there wrapping up affairs on the mountain. Sealed safely in its shrine, Omen would be there if they needed it. Corson knew they wouldn't. It was a charade. No one was coming for them. He'd known that as soon as he saw the transmitter's melted guts. The planet Kesh was nowhere near anywhere, or Nagasato would have found them by now, them and his precious lignin crystals. He wondered about Captain Sayes and the Harbinger. Had they survived the collision that sent Omen astray? Had the fallen Jedi won the glory that would have belonged to the Sith after a victory at Primus Golud? Or had Nagasato slain him for his incompetence? Does Sato even live? Idle thoughts, Corson knew, but he had to keep these questions alive in his people so long as they remembered where they came from. Stability demanded it. It had required an elegant balancing act. Sith facing a future only on Kesh would forever fight for status, meaning more days like the ones years before when he and Devore had dueled. He looked at the Sith standing at attention on either side of the wide slate stairs leading down the platform. So many people, so many ambitions to manage. It was why Corson had allowed them to think that he had indeed activated the emergency beacon once before it failed. The prospect of departure had the power to unite. So did the specter of the arrival of a punishing superior power. But he also had to make sure any hoped-for escape always ran second to their real job, reshaping Kesh as a Sith world. What had happened to Ravelin's people was partially due to Corson's failure at managing that, though he didn't mind the result. Unlike his wife, he had nothing against the crimson-skinned Sith, but factions threatened order. A homogeneous Sith people was easier to rule. His wife. Marrying Sela had been another nod to stability, a bridge between Omen's crew and its mining team passengers. There she was, across the dais, greeting the dignitaries the Kashiri were allowed to have. Greeting, that is, without actually touching any of them. Corson never touched her anymore either. It was a shame. She was gorgeous now, black hair cascading in ringlets around flawless dusky skin. He didn't know what dark sorceries her team of experts had wrought, but she looked scarcely a day over 35. This move was her idea. She'd hated the sterility of the mountain retreat. Their new home was warmer, both in temperature and in appearance. The Kashiri artisans and Sith designers had learned much from one another. There was stone, yes, but thorned dulciflowers scaled the exterior walls. Gardens appeared here and there beside gurgling aqueduct-fed pools. It was a place for life. Not all Kashiri cities had been places for life. Corson thought as he acknowledged the elders hobbling past. He could have lost the people entirely years before. The mass deaths at the lake towns had been effectively ascribed to the residents' lack of faith in the tribe's divinity. They'd even made a show for the doubters. A known Kashiri dissenter was trotted onto the circle eternal to proclaim against the so-called protectors, only to fall seemingly choking to death on his own words. Corson himself was able to appear benevolent and shocked, but the message was clear. Plague and pestilence awaited the defiant. Gloyd had thought up that little stunt. Good old Gloyd, more old now than good. The stern Hook stood behind, lightsaber drawn, as Corson's ceremonial bodyguard. But the one-time gunner now looked like he needed the protecting. He was the last non-human left from the original crew. An age would pass without him. An age would pass with him. Sorry. The daughter of the Skyborn, Adari Val, Gloyd announced. Corson immediately forgot all about architecture and clever hooks. Adari, their native rescuer of old, stepped mildly before them and bowed. Corson watched her cold welcome from Sela. They weren't in front of half of Kesh. If they weren't in front of half of Kesh, it would be colder still. He always marveled when he watched the two together. There wasn't any comparison. Sela was attractive, but she knew it, and never let anyone forget it. She found the Kashiri ugly, more proof her judgment was never to be trusted. As a Kashiri, Adari was so much less than Sela, and yet so much more. She wasn't touched by the Force, but she had a nimble mind, grappling with things far beyond her people's obvious limitations, and she had the will of a Sith, if not the beliefs. Only twice had he seen her strength fail her. Most important, the first time, when she had agreed to keep Devor's death a secret. That had made so many things possible for both of them. Stepping before him, Adari regarded Corson with her dark, probing eyes, full of mystery and intelligence. He took her hand and smiled. Forget Sela. 25 years he'd saved his people. This was a good day. You can read my mind. Don't you know how uncomfortable this is for me? Don't you care? Adari pulled her hand free from Corson's and managed to smile. Sela's greeting had only given her a mild shiver, but Yaru Corson always looked at her like a cart he was about to buy at half price. She tried to step back and continue down the receiving line, but Corson pulled at her arm. This is your day too, Adari. Stand with us. Marvelous, she thought. She tried to avoid Sela's gaze, unsure if Corson's body would be enough to block it, but at least this was a discomfort she'd learned to cope with on a daily basis. Public spectacles like this one she'd never get used to. And they had all gone so well for her, whatever her age or status. Right here on this site, she had stood accused as a heretic, and then days later she stood feted as a hero. No matter that she had just brought a plague upon her people in the form of the Sith. Now that the old plaza was buried under this new edifice, she was here again, looking out across a sea of ignorance. The Kashiri blithely celebrated their own enslavement, ignoring their countless brothers and sisters who had died since the Sith arrival. Many had perished in the Lake Town disaster, but many more lives had been lost at hard labor, attempting to please their guests from above. The Sith had twisted the Kashiri faith so none of that mattered. Every vain hope the masses ever had was invested in the Sith. Even Adari wasn't immune. She thought back to her poor son, Finn, bloodied and smashed. He'd insisted on joining the work crew on reaching his teen years. No child of the daughter of the Skyborn needed to work, but Jarival's youngest had rebelled against exactly on schedule, hiring off to a work crew. I think that's supposed to be hiring off to a work crew. A scaffold hurriedly erected had given way. Adari had failed that day too, flying her broken child to the temple and Corson's feet. Corson had immediately come to Finn's side, working his Sith magic. For a moment, Adari had found herself hoping that Corson could actually return life to her son, but of course he couldn't. She already knew they weren't gods. Corson had earned a fight with Sela that day. Healing was her domain, but Adari hadn't given a thought to consulting her medics. The Sith doctors had been interested in the Kashiri only long enough to learn that their diseases posed them no threat, and that they could bear the Sith no children. Maybe that was why Sela tolerated Adari's companionship with Corson. But that friendship was never the same after that day. Adari had enjoyed learning from Corson, but Finn's death had woken her conscience. She'd meant one thing to her people. Thereafter she'd mean something else. As the leader of the Kashiri underground resistance movement, made up of others who had come to their senses, and now, after a dozen years, they were finally ready to act. From the south, a thunderous rumble sounded. The Cecil Spire had been feeling its volcanic youth lately. Safely remote, it nonetheless disrupted the perfect formation of Uvok flyers hovering over the procession. Adari looked up at them, and then hard at Corson, hair now slate gray. She'd learned to hide her thoughts from him by maintaining a steady, emotionless manner. She needed that now, more than ever. She managed to smile. Corson had called to her for deliverance years before. Soon she would deliver her own kind. I'm not the bargain you think I am. Neither is Kesh. Sela watched as the flight of Uvok landed on the clearing below. Theirs had been a sloppy approach, not enough to ruin the day, but enough to call attention where it didn't belong. It principally did not belong on the lead rider, now dismounting and stepping toward the staircase. For her 20th birthday, Yaru Corson had made his whelp of a daughter head of something that didn't exist, the Skyborn Rangers. It was little more than a club of Sith hobby riders, useful only for public displays like this. Nita Corson had just shown it wasn't even much good at that. That Nita was also her daughter was a detail of genealogy. The child's outfit was an abomination against fashion. Sela imagined the Uvok leather vest and chaps were supposed to make her look rugged and active. But stepping up to the receiving line, little Nita simply looked comical. Sela recognized her own eyes and cheekbones in the girl, though not much else. Short-cropped hair and colored face paints made waste of whatever natural beauty Nita may have inherited. The girl would never have made it through one of Sela's infamous inspections. She's the child of the Grand Lord, Sela rasped to Corson as their daughter stepped past. What must the Kashiri think? Since when do you care about that? Nita shuffled off the stage with barely a nod from Corson. It was time for the real show. Shrieks from the crowd, first of surprise, then of joy. From locations within the multitude, 24 costumed merrymakers in ceremonial Kashiri masks leapt high into the air, tearing their cloaks free as they did. Landing on ground cleared of bystanders by firm force pushes, the black-clad acrobats stood revealed as the Sabers, the tribe's new honor detail. Crimson lightsabers danced as they performed intricate exercises. The final flourish resulted in an explosion of delight from the Kashiri, followed by an announcement from Gloyd. High Lord Jeriad of the line of Corson. The lead saber strode robustly up the central staircase to the dais, stealing Kashiri breaths with every resolute step. Ebon hair and beard perfectly coiffed, Jeriad made every pause a pose for history. The wild child of Devor Corson and Sela had come of age. Lightsaber still ignited, Jeriad stood before Yaru Corson, nephew and stepson. Jeriad was nearly a third of a meter taller, a fact not lost on anyone watching. An icy look passed between them. Suddenly, Jeriad knelt, holding the lightsaber centimeters above the back of his own tanned neck. I live and die at your command, Grand Lord Corson. Rise, High Lord Corson. Sela watched with relief as her son rose to a warm embrace. The crowd cooed. For all his title and family connection, Jeriad was not Yaru Corson's heir to power any more than Sela was. Corson had long kept his succession plans private. The 7 High Lords he had appointed were mere advisors, but if Jeriad was a public favorite, Sela knew Sith and Kashiri alike would recognize his claim one way or another. She was pleased. Jeriad had acted just as she had advised. Yaru Corson's moment was due, but this was no place for it. Jeriad greeted the others, giving special attention to Adari. The Kashiri woman backed away immediately and looked down. It wasn't modesty, Sela knew, though the insufferable boar had much to be modest about. Ever since her son grew into his late father's looks, Sela had always caught stray thoughts from Adari whenever Jeriad was around. She'd wondered about it for a long time. Had Corson bragged to his strumpet about killing Devor? Would that be enough to cause such a strong reaction? Eventually, Sela found the answer. Deep in her own thoughts, she had rifled through Adari's mind years earlier when they had first met in darkness on the mountain. Then Sela had been searching for any hint of rescue, but on contemplation, Sela had realized that the sea of stones and purple faces in the witless alien's mind included something else. Something half-seen but shocking to Adari, and at that time, recent, a body thrown from the precipice into the raging sea. Adari Val had seen Yaru murder Devor Corson, and so at last had Sela. Jeriad returned to his mother's side and gave her a knowing glance. Soon, she whispered. It required care. Corson had friends, most from Omen's permanent crew, but many Devor Corson partisans remained. Whispered tales of the commander withholding information about their marooned situation won other allies. She'd see that everyone was in the right place at the right time. The crowd roared again as Corson took her hand and turned toward the steps leading up into their new home. Sela smiled. 25 years. She'd saved all her hate. The end was coming. That's the end of Chapter 1. Getting into Chapter 2. Corson recognized the sound immediately. Lightsabers clashed in the gallery of the Capitol right outside the hallway to his office. Whirling across the glossy floor, Jeriad charged at 3 attackers clad in saber black. Their blades weren't tracing harmless circuits in the air this time. Jeriad's assailants lunged at him, only to be driven back by his angry riposte. One by one, Jeriad bested his opponents, driving one underneath a falling statue, hurling another through a brand new pane of smoked glass. The third saw his lightsaber skitter down a hallway when Jeriad separated his gloved hand from his wrist. Corson stepped from the hall, lightsaber and severed hand in hand. Are you sure you want to call this group of yours the Sabers? They seem to be without. Jerry had deactivated his weapon and exhaled. "This is what I wanted to show you, Grand Lord. They were too quickly disarmed." "You shouldn't take that word so literally, son," Corson said, tossing the hand to its wincing owner on the floor. "We don't exactly have a modern med lab here." "There's no quarter for incompetence. It was an exercise, Jared, not the Great Schism. Take a breath and come outside," Corson sighed. Despite his feelings about his late half-brother, he had tried to provide guidance for Jared. It just wasn't taking. Jared had too many of the same self-absorbed traits that had ruined Devore. Either he did nothing, or he overdid it. It was a good thing there weren't any narcotics on Kesh, nor Corson thought. Jared might have picked up where his father left off. Corson stepped out into the failing sun. The volcano had ruined a lot of nice days lately. A Kashiri servant materialized bearing refreshments. "Things are no good here," Jared said, emerging. "There are too many distractions here in this city." "They are distracting," Corson said, casting an eye into the courtyard. Adari Val had arrived. Oh, they are distracting. So it was a statement, not a beginning of a statement. Jerry had ignored her. "Grand Lord, I request permission to remove the sabers to the northern reaches for a training mission. There they can concentrate." Corson looked back at his nephew. "Oh, certainly." He took the second cup from the tray. "Excuse me." Corson had thought Adari was looking up at him. Joining her in the garden, he found she was actually staring at a relief sculpture being carved into a triangular pediment on the building above. What is that?" she asked. Corson squinted. "If I'm not mistaken, that's a depiction of my own birth." He took a drink. "I'm not sure how the sun and the stars are involved." Everywhere he looked in this palace, the Kashiri had plastered something depicting his divinity. He chuckled to himself. "We've really done a sales job." "I wasn't expecting you today." "We're neighbors now," she said, idly taking the glass. "With a place this size, we're neighbors with half of Kesh. And the other half's inside the house cleaning the floor." Adari stopped abruptly and looked him in the eyes. Every so often she flirted with crossing the line. Corson laughed heartily. She always made him laugh. But when leathery wings swooped overhead, Corson saw the real reason for Adari's visit. Tana, her surviving son, rushed from an ornate exterior structure to catch the bridle of a landing Uvak. Nita Corson had returned from her morning ride. Corson had named Tana the traveling stable master for Nita's group, just after its founding. The young man seemed amiable enough, if not particularly sharp, and Nita seemed fond of him. Adari took her son aside and exchanged quiet words. Adari turned back to Corson. "I'm sorry, but I have business in town." "Will I see you again?" "What, today?" "No, I meant ever." Corson laughed again. She's uneasy, he thought. He wondered why. "Of course today. We're in the same city now, aren't we?" Adari rolled her eyes at the colossal building behind them. "That's a lot of effort just to have me around more," she managed to smile. "Well, just know that I won't be here tomorrow," Corson said. "Seela's med center is moving here from the temple. I'll head up in the morning to inspect the whole place before we close everything down. It's only for a day." Absorbing his words, Adari touched his hand. "I should be going." As she stepped away, Corson looked again at his daughter across the yard. Nita had paused to watch. Jared and his humbled combatants marching deliberately to their own mounts, and Tona, he saw, was watching her. "Your son should be careful, Adari," Corson said. "He's been spending a lot of time with Nita," he smirked. "It's that Corson charm that keeps you Vals around." "Well, not today, your grand lordship," Adari said, gesturing to her approaching son. "Tona's coming with me. Family business." "I understand," Corson said. Family business. Watching Jared fly off to the north, he wished he had less of it himself. Years before, Isri Daj had been her tormentor, inquisitor for the Neshtavar. Daj had branded Adari Val a heretic for not hewing to the legends about Kesh's creation and the role in it of their gods from above, the Skyborn. Daj was long dead, but now his sons and grandsons sat silently across from Adari in Daj's candle-lit drawing room. Adari's resistance movement had met in various places over the years, from beneath an aqueduct on the back of an Uvok's to the back of an Uvok stable Tana ran in Tav. But seldom had they met in such luxury, or what had been considered luxury before Adari brought people claiming to be the Skyborn into their midst to reshape the Kashiri's standards. Now in the dwelling that had once temporarily housed Grand Lord Corson himself, Neshtavar and a heretic together decided the fate of the Kashiri people. "This will work," she said. "What you've taught me about Uvok, what we've arranged for your people to do, this will work." "It had better," rumbled the eldest male. "We're giving up a lot." "You've already given up a lot. This is the only way back." Adari knew she'd taken a chance by bringing members of the Neshtavar into her circle, but it had to be done. While the old Neshtavar still remembered what had been taken from them by the Sith, the memory of the benefits her old society had unfairly heaped on the Uvok riders had gained their cooperation now. Adari had recently realized that the Uvok were the key. The Sith were powerful. One acting alone could keep scores of Kashiri at bay, perhaps even an entire village. But they had to reach the village first, and here Kesh with its sprawling landmass worked against them. The Sith numbered nearly 600 now, almost double what they had arrived with, but the villages of Kesh were more numerous still. Maintaining order required the Sith to make frequent Uvok flights to the hinterlands. Neshtavar flyers of another era had united the continent by surmounting the many natural barriers. Now the Sith used the same strategy, dispatching circuit riders to make appearances and consult the local bureaucracies, mostly staffed by one-time members of the Neshtavar. But while they were in the Sith's lieutenants on the ground, the Neshtavar were now also grounded. Though the Sith had taken the strongest Uvok for themselves soon after their arrival, that still left teeming thousands of domesticated beasts to the Kashiri. Most had been employed as animal labor, but the Neshtavar were still allowed to fly Uvok on visits to the Sith mountain retreat, among other administrative chores. That had ended after the disaster at the lakes. Uvok riders were the Kashiri's traditional newsbearers, but the Sith wanted no word spread but theirs. Former riders, now reduced to police work, were now keeping the stables, nurturing creatures they would never be allowed to ride. Their Uvok belonged to Sith, probably still in the creche. Adari had been allowed to keep Nink so that she could continue to visit Corson, but she was the only one. "Corson is going to the mountain temple tomorrow," she said. "Sela is there, and Jared has left for the north." The Neshtavar men nodded to one another. "Very good," the oldest said. "We have adequate numbers in place everywhere if your head count is right." "It is." Her movement included Kashiri aides to many of the major Sith. Tilden Ka had been counting heads among Sela's retinue. She had other people close to Corson and Jared. Her son was even keeping track of Nita's flying performers. Noon tomorrow. This will work. She thought about Corson as she stepped into the torch-lit alleyway behind the dwelling. Summoned by Sela, Corson wouldn't go alone to the temple, no matter how mundane the matter. She double-checked the figures she'd marked on her hand. Yes, she'd had enough people there, just among the stable hands closing up shop. Tana appeared from the darkness. "I've been waiting." "Sorry," Adari said, looking up. They wanted to go over everything again. She could see her son's flickering disappointment as he stepped into the light. She'd always thought both her children favored their father. Now, in his late 20s, Tana surprised her with how much he was looking like her. I should have been with you, Mother. I'm of the Neshtavar too. They're just being careful, Tona. The fewer people who know the details, the better. I want to ride with you tomorrow, Tona said. You've got your own job to do, Adari said, and you'll see me when you've succeeded. She touched his cheek. You shouldn't be away from Nita and her people too long. Tomorrow we'll be busy. Get some sleep. Adari watched as he turned into the night. Sweet, simple Tona. She hadn't told him everything, but then, how could she? Her late mother had never understood her heresy or her canonization. How could her son accept her martyrdom? The Golden Age had begun, Sela thought as she surveyed her empty wardroom, and she was responsible. They'd done good work here in the years she ran the tribe's medical staff. All local maladies had been identified and controlled. With Kashiri aid, Sela's biologists had scoured the countryside, indexing botanical remedies useful to humans. The force healing skills of her staff, far from atrophying, had increased. So had the survival rate of amputees. The tribe was a purer people, too, thanks to her attention to eugenics. Before too many generations, the blood of the Sith on Kesh would be fully human. She was sorry she wouldn't live to see it. Or would she? A pleasant thought. But the Sith were already more pleasing to look at. She'd instilled in the younglings a respect for their bodies, a lust for physical perfection. The Sith Lords they'd left behind were atrocious role models, most of them a barbarian jangle of baubles and war paint. Sela's tribe would have none of that. Tattoos were labels for slaves. A Sith of Kesh was already born a work of art. And after the losses in the Purge, the tribe's numbers had begun to increase rapidly in the last few years. The prospect of a warm home near sea level was enough to stir the most independent-minded Sith with thoughts of family. Out in the courtyard, Sela saw the tribe's leading hedonist, Orlenda, enormously pregnant. Wonders never ceased. That's everything, Orlenda said, propping herself against a rickety cart of supplies about to leave for Tav. The younger woman looked down nervously. Corson was to arrive any minute. Do you want me here for this? I can't fly, but I can ride down on this cart with the breakables. Sela bit her lip. Seeing Orlenda at Sela's side when he arrived would put Corson at ease. But if something went wrong here, Orlenda would make sure Sela's policies lived on. Go, she said, sighing. But hurry, they're arriving. Orlenda rattled off behind Kashiri's bearers. Besides Uvok, they were Kesh's only beasts of burden. Okay. It was time. Sela hurried toward the plaza formed by the domiciles and Omen's shrine. Corson's entourage landed at the far end, right on schedule for a change. Corson and Gloyd's 4 bodyguards took their positions as Kashiri attendants walked the Uvok away. Their stables would be the very last thing to close. Corson studied the plaza around him. Ah, Sela, there you are. He stepped toward her. Out in the open. Yes, there you are. She closed her eyes and concentrated. Now, Jariad. And cliffhanger. That's the end of the chapter. So we'll leave off there. There are only 2 chapters left in this book, just like the other Lost Tribe of the Sith novellas. So that'll be it until oh wait, this is Tuesday. I read the wrong thing. I was supposed to be reading Occult tonight. I'm a day off because I didn't stream last night. Oh well. So we skipped 1984. Oh well. That's fine. That's fine. We'll get back to it on Thursday, and I'll go ahead and read the Star Wars reading tomorrow night, like I'm supposed to, and we'll get back on schedule. So, anyway, that'll be it for this, and I'll be back in a little bit for some We Happy Few. That part I did have right. See you in a few minutes.